name is Tim Pullman, and I will be moderating this webinar, this panel. Let me start with some general housekeeping rules. You all will have a chat box on the right-hand side, which you can use to ask any questions during our discussion. We will leave 5 to 10 minutes at the very end to have the panel answer them. Also use the chat box should you have any technical issues. We try to solve them. Also, let me remind you that this webinar will be recorded and we will send you the slides afterwards. So you don't have to take notes. It will be all sent automatically tomorrow. So today's webinar will be about the new era of standards competition. We have a great panel here that I will introduce you to in a second, which will discuss 5G versus Wi-Fi 6, HEVC, VVC versus AV1, VP9. And what we will discuss about is how will the technical merit or access to SEP licenses determine which standard will be the winner in the end. Let me kick off this webinar with a few slides to give you some introduction of what the landscape looks like. What is interesting, I think, is that the latest generations of 5G and Wi-Fi 6, for example, have a greater deal of crossover than the earlier generations. And when we look at, for example, performance improvements for Wi-Fi 6, many actually predict that with that Wi-Fi standard, we can have Wi-Fi in sports stadiums, like in huge stadiums with lots of people, thousands, 10,000s of people that log in parallel. But also we can see use cases on concert hall, corporate campuses, all of those use cases that are currently mostly covered by cellular standards. But you could argue the other way around. 5G is expected to connect homes, factories, vehicles, you know, things that are today rather are connected with the Wi-Fi technology. So these two standards, they may compete in the future, especially for IoT applications. As everything today is displayed and shared in video content, video coding will also play a major role for the future of IoT. And here we also have different standardized technologies like HEVC, VVC, the latest standard, just ratified and released, AV9 and VP9 that compete in the market. So this is a great, actually, data point that we recently pulled from the Wi-Fi Alliance, which looks at products that adopted wireless standards. And of course, you know, the main thing that we know since years is routers, computers that connect to the Wi-Fi. Then, you know, probably 10 years ago, gaming started. The new gaming consoles like PlayStation and Xboxes connected to the wireless. Also your TVs, set-up boxes and television, tablets, phones. We all know that. But what's interesting is the last two ones, smart homes and buildings, that recently increased very much in being in the Wi-Fi Alliance as being in the product category of certified products for Wi-Fi. And that proves directly there's an IoT use case. And when you look at the contributions for Wi-Fi 5, 6, and even 7, they even started 7 now, you see that those companies already put a lot of R&D in those technologies. What we found interesting that if you look at this landscape here as to standards contribution, we do see that it's very much US focused. You see that over 60% of the standard contributions for those 3 generations of wireless technology come from US companies. And that in comparison to the landscape in the 5G and 4G space, when we look at declared families, you know, we do see that here we have a lot of Asian players as well. The Koreans, LG and Nokia, LG and Samsung, the Chinese, of course, Huawei and ZTE, and of course also the Europeans, Nokia and Ericsson, that compete to the American companies like Qualcomm, Intel, Apple, that are declaring patents for those latest generations of cellular technologies. And what is interesting, if you look at all that data over the past years, as to our database, we find over 37,000 patents declared for 5G only. We all know these declarations, not all will be essential in the end. But that breaks down, even if we filter further, to 18,000 declared 5G patent families that are granted and active. And if we even filter further down, looking only at US or EP granted active patents, it's still 14,000. So even if 10 or 20% are essential, we still have quite a high number. And if we look at the total number or added up with 4G, it's even higher. We are at 20,000 active filed patents that have been declared to 4G or 5G in the US and EP. So that is quite a high number of patents for these cellular technology standards. We also have a quite interesting landscape in the world of video coding. This is the companies that recently contributed to AVC, HEVC, and VVC, which just finished. And also there, for those technologies, we know after the cellular space and the wireless space, the video coding space is one of the most patented standardized technologies. And because there's so many patents, we also do have a lot of pools. So that is a quite busy picture here. Not because there's a lot of logos on here, because we do have 4 patent pools alone: HEVC Advanced, MPEG-LA, Velos Media, and also Ciscos recently set up the VP9 and AV1 pool. And we do have some companies that are in both pools. We have companies in, that choose just for one pool, and we even have outsiders, unaffiliated companies that do not license their essential patents through pools. So we do have a lot of licensing programs here, but as you see, also some complexity in terms of different license offerings. If you look at the share, and here what we did is we looked at contributions for HEVC only. However, we do have a very high share of actually pooled technology in here, at least what we estimated. It could be like 2/3 or even 3/4 of essential patents that might be pooled. So that's a pretty high pool share. And also what we found interesting, of course, recently, that those standards that for some time were perceived as being royalty-free because or free of patents, free of standard essential patents, AV1 and VP9, suddenly Ciscos forms a pool around it, and standard essential patents actually do exist. And there's a program around AV1 where we see here those essential patents that have been pooled under the Ciscos pool for AV1 and the ones for VP9. So we see it's quite an interesting landscape for both wireless, cellular technologies, same as the video coding space. And that is exactly what I would like to talk about today with our great panel. So thank you very much. We have 4 great speakers here. We have Dave Djavaherian, he comes from PacTech Law. We have Fabian Gonell from Qualcomm, Jim Holland from InterDigital, and Judd Carey from Cable Labs. And I will directly start this and kick it off with addressing the first question to you, Fabian. Qualcomm, as you see in our landscapes at least, Qualcomm is one of the leading companies, both for wireless technologies and cellular technologies. So in your opinion, what do you think, which are the use cases where these 2 standards actually compete, where you really have the choice to use one or the other?
Well, they compete in consumer use cases and industrial use cases. Basically, any use case that doesn't require a great deal of mobility, they will compete or can compete. The conditions under which they compete can vary. For Wi-Fi, the backhaul is very important. Anyone who has struggled with the internet connection to their home knows that. But in terms of what they can be used for, what people can use them for, stadiums. People in stadiums aren't moving; they're there to see an event. So they can compete there. But the parameters of competition will be shaped by not just the event or not just that particular place, but the broader industrial background, including backhaul, including other connectivity, including what the infrastructure is generally.
Okay, very interesting. Just in terms of, if you think about these use cases, is it also likely that they will both be used? I mean, I can see in a football stadium, some people will connect to that free open Wi-Fi, while others just stay on their 4G, 5G connection. How will those be compatible? Is it easy to switch from one to the other, or is it typically that you choose one or the other to have a good performance? What is most likely here?
It's hard to say. I mean, cellular has solved a lot of the massive connection problems. We've solved a lot of connection problems in cellular at stadiums. We've actually done a lot of work on that. And the problems basically are a lot of people connecting in a small area and using the system all at once. It's not how cellular system usually operates. Usually cellular system is based on the premise that there'll be only so much population density or use density at a time, whereas it's really intense in the stadium setting. Now, a lot of those same solutions can be used or in Wi-Fi. There's still radio technology and there are radio problems, but how that works out and how that ends up operating really depends on all of the background available. The general industrial background. Are there cell sites already near a stadium? If not, then the stadium operator might have to invest in a small cell. If, on the other hand, if there's no fiber to the stadium, well, then you're not going to be able to do massive Wi-Fi in this space. That's just not going to work. So it's not just as simple as which is the better radio technology. There's an entire background that will affect what is used in a particular setting.
Okay.
Well, one way I look at it, I don't necessarily look at these as competing technologies. When you put coming from a network operator standpoint, like cable or a mobile network operator, I think they're more complementary, actually. And as a mobile network operator, they would like to see traffic migrated off of their network, 5G, and onto unlicensed Wi-Fi. So that helps the traffic load on their network, offload that to unlicensed Wi-Fi. And then, because a lot of these operators have dedicated spectrum that they own, 5G also has the potential for unlicensed spectrum. So they would also migrate some of that traffic off of 5G to 5G, unlicensed. So I see them kind of as complementary, but also, yes, in different contexts, possibly competing as well.
Yeah, the spectrum, the use of spectrum and how scarce spectrum is a very important part of the analysis. Very important part.
Great, interesting. Very good. Jim, any comments from you? InterDigital is also one of the major players here. What is your take on this? You see them as complements as well, or also competing for some use cases?
Well, I'm just going to say that Fabian and Judd said everything I was going to say. So, so first of all, thanks Tim and other panelists for the opportunity to virtually sit up here with y'all, with peers I like and respect. And typical disclaimer, my views are mine and do not necessarily reflect those of my employer. I do see them as complementary. I think that stadium concert is a perfect example. I remember going to a Coldplay concert a few years ago and wearing one of those LED band bracelets that blinked, and that was a Wi-Fi type connection. It was not cellular, but there was probably, I don't know, 10 of us watching Coldplay. No, I'm kidding. There was more, but yeah, I do see them as complementary, but sort of in a use case specific environment. I mean, the whole aspect of automation, whether it's in autonomous vehicles, I think is kind of an interesting place where they intersect. There's one notion that you can have access points kind of on every mile marker, let's say, of a freeway. I don't know how expensive that gets. But then likewise, you can have a cellular tower that provides cellular connectivity to a much larger area. A car could have cellular connectivity externally and then Wi-Fi connectivity internally. But I do think it's important to note that, and this is where I was joking, but it's totally true, that the issue of spectrum, I think, is very key to both use cases. Now, obviously, cellular is a spectrum-based technology, and federal governments own that spectrum for the most part. Now, there is the unlicensed spectrum, which is where Wi-Fi plays. And then, as Judd mentioned, there's the CBRS, which is the, I always forget, it's like community broadband radio spectrum or something. That is an unlicensed space for 5G as well. So definitely, I think spectrum is going to be the big thing, because then also to what Fabian said, the issue of the backhaul, you know, where does this stuff go? How big are the pipes that this data is going to flow through? And if you don't have that, if you just have coax running to the stadium, you're going to be in trouble versus if you had a fiber optic cable versus if you had a cellular tower close by. So I think it's all very dependent on use case.
Great. Thanks for these comments. And I also want to know from the audience, because I'm sure we have some experts in the audience as well, to answer the question, do you think that Wi-Fi 6 and 5G will compete for some IoT applications? Yes or no? If you think they're complementary, it's probably rather a no question, no answer, but I'd love to hear from you guys. And it is quite interesting. You don't see this yet, and I will share this in a second. But I think the majority believes they do compete. While I feel that you guys in the panel, we're all kind of aligned that they are rather complements. So, you know, it's a different opinion here, what I see. Yeah, you see, 85% believe they do indeed compete, which brings me to my next question. If they do compete, Dave, is it only about technical merit, or could it also be that some of the companies that implement these standards just are scared because, you know, we have, some people call it patent wars going on in the cellular space, and they just don't want to have the cellular technology in their products, while in wireless licensing, at least they hope this could be different. And I wonder, has it also to do with the different IPR policies that we see for IEEE and ETSI?
Sure. So again, Tim, thank you for having us and for assembling the panel. Let me just offer one thought on the poll, which is I do think that it was relatively consistent with what the panelists were saying. It wasn't that I think Fabian or Jim were disagreeing that it could be competitive in some environments or for some applications. And I think that's what the poll asked. And so the idea of it being always competitive or always complementary, I think it's more nuanced than that. And I think that the audience is right to find that at least in some environments and some applications, you're going to have some decisions to make between the technologies. Turning to the IPR policies, my background, I mean, I was in-house counsel at the time, the largest Wi-Fi manufacturer in the world. And I saw the Wi-Fi licensing issues up close, as well as, you know, the cellular issues that I've been dealing with, you know, both when I was in-house and as an outside counsel. It is a very different environment, and it is an important distinction. And I have seen companies, both publicly and privately, decide not to use cellular specifically because of concerns over licensing, decide not to develop products, decide not to develop IoT applications because of concerns about licensing. Wi-Fi is different for a couple of reasons. One, the IEEE policy always, meaning before 2015 as well as after 2015, has required licensing to all applicants. That requirement has been in the policy, you know, from the get-go, and that's sort of been something that's maybe a little bit different than the ETSI policy, just in terms of wording. Two, there's been a history of licensing amongst the chip makers. You showed a great graphic earlier where you showed who's actually contributing to and building these standards. You know, it's Broadcom, Qualcomm, Marvell, Intel, companies at the chip level that are doing a lot of the hard work. and some of the downstream companies, unlike at the ETSI technical working groups, are less involved. And so I think what we've seen also historically is not just that the ETSI IPR policy requires licensing to all applicants, but also in addition that there actually were a number of publicly disclosed chip level licenses. And what that does is it allows licenses to promulgate throughout the supply chain, so that when you buy a Wi-Fi product and integrate it into your downstream device, you don't have to worry about somebody coming up to you later and asking for a license that you weren't expecting. And two, historically, it also has allowed at least some level of indemnity being provided by the suppliers to the customers so that they don't have to worry about later licensing claims. Where I've seen companies elect not to pursue cellular because of concerns about licensing, it's been twofold. One, they don't understand the environment and the licensing environment and can't be sure that they're going to be able to obtain licenses on fair terms. And two, because the suppliers can't get licenses themselves in many cases, they can't provide indemnity. And that disrupts the supply chain in a way that affects different industries a little bit differently based on their historical practices, but has been a disruptive force that I think has limited the adoption of IoT into some of these, different industry verticals outside of handsets. Interesting.
Thanks for that overview, Dave. I think a lot of good points you raised already. Fabian, what is your take on this? Why is the cellular space, why is there so much litigation going on, and will there be a solution soon? What is your opinion on that? I think you are still on mute, Fabian.
My apologies. I'll start by saying I appreciate Dave recognizing that cellular, that the ETSI IPR policy doesn't require licensing at the component level, which it doesn't. I disagree that the IEEE policy before 2015 required licensing other than at the device level. It doesn't require multi-level licensing at all, but the policy was changed, so that only matters for older standards. In terms of does licensing inhibit cellular, I don't think there's any evidence of that. I would very much like to see some company come publicly out and say, no, we were going to use cellular in this product, but we were afraid or something happened and so we didn't. I don't think that happens. Cellular has grown enormously over the years. It's grown into new areas, and licensing has never inhibited that to any material degree. In terms of why there are disputes, there are disputes because there can be a lot of money involved. The companies you hear most raising quote unquote concerns about IoT cellular licensing are companies that make cellular phones, cellular smartphones. And why are they doing that? They're not doing that because they care about IoT. They're doing that because they're trying to drive down the value of patents so that they can pay less for their smartphones. The quote unquote patent wars, what are they about? Right? They were historically about smartphones. Now there's a dispute between one car company, Daimler, and one licensor, Nokia, that's going on. But that's in an environment where other car companies have taken licenses from Avanci. That's in an environment where Qualcomm has a great number of licenses for vehicles at upstream levels, at tier ones, and even more upstream than that. And so the patent wars or the litigation might get a lot of play and a lot of attention, but there's always the possibility of litigation when there's a lot of money involved, because sometimes people will see it in their interest to try new things to try to pay less. We're seeing now the end of, or the resolution of, a holdout strategy that has persisted for about 10 years, maybe a little bit more, where courts are finally saying no to a lot of the holdout tactics that were used in smartphones and that are being attempted in cars. And you see courts actually labeling people as unwilling licensees when they engage in those tactics. So I think that there's not a lot to the notion that IoT is going to be inhibited by licensing, because people are rational commercial actors.
Just because, one question, the auto industry is perceived to be the first one that dealt with this, and we have now first court decisions coming in. That's, I think, quite interesting. However, there's a lot of people that argue that we have so many use cases in IoT. How do we find agreement on price? Well, it really depends on where the patented technology is used in the product. And will this always, to a certain extent, cause somehow complexity or challenges to get access to SEP licenses?
So in general, no. It's you have to look at a few things. One is, I agree that the appropriate price depends on the use case, because that determines what the value of the technology brings. I don't think that's really that controversial a topic. That's a concept that's enshrined in the law, at least U.S. patent law. There are people out there, the smartphone people are out there advocating that the price of cellular technology should be at the lowest common denominator. So what this value cellular brings when you put it in a vending machine should be what they pay for use in their smartphones. I think the IoT industry, the people who work in IoT, should recognize the danger of that to them. Because if licensors recognize that cellular brings less value to their applications and therefore are willing to charge them less, because that's economically efficient and appropriate and fair, but doing so means that the smartphone people get a free ride, then that's not going to work. That's just simply not going to work. So in general, because people are rational actors, licensing in IoT will proceed in an orderly way. It's not going to be a situation where big licensors are trying to inhibit the marketplace. That we have no interest in doing that. And I don't think there's going to be a lot of licensing activity at first in IoT, where people are going to wait for the market to shake out.
What is your take, Dave, on this? How do you see the recent decisions in litigation? There was also a DOJ update on the 215 business letters. How do you see those recent things?
Sure. So I'll address a few of the points Fabian made in a moment. In terms of the recent decisions, everyone likes to hype up the cases that they like the most, right? So you see, one camp of folks talking about the Innovadio case and the Microsoft Motorola case, and Judge Selna's original decision in TCL, the Korean FTC case, etc. You see another camp hyping up, some of the recent German cases, the Unwired Planet case, maybe some of the cases from Texas in the United States. The law is still developing. I think it's a little bit early to talk about the end of a holdout strategy, as Fabian referred to it. I think it's the ongoing grappling of the courts with a very complex problem and trying to figure out what the right and fair way is. And we're not there yet. And I don't think that the recent cases or the DOJ opinion reflect where the law is going to end up. In terms of some of the points that Fabian made, I'll try to respond briefly. First of all, I never suggested, indicated, or claimed that the ETSI IPR policy doesn't require component level licensing. Of course it does. It's been held to. The former Director General of ETSI, who oversaw development of the ETSI IPR policy, said that was always the intention. We could argue about that at length, but in terms of putting words in my mouth, that's not what I said. What I pointed out is that the IEEE policy specifically is a little bit more clear, perhaps, on that issue by saying all applicants. That all applicants language does not appear in the ETSI IPR policy. In terms of examples of situations where in the real world IoT projects have not gone forward because of concerns over licensing, I have seen, as I said, a number of private examples of that, which I'm not at liberty to share. I will share one public example, which is public because I believe it appears in an amicus brief that was filed in the Ninth Circuit proceedings, where a developer of a drone that was designed to control forest fires, to sort of be used by park rangers and such, and be implemented over the large acreage to monitor for forest fires so that they could be put out more quickly and more efficiently, decided to just bag the entire project out of concerns of licensing issues and the inability to get indemnity from the suppliers of the wireless devices. In terms of this issue of, oh, this is just some handset makers trying to get a lower price, it absolutely is nothing like that. You may see in litigation, which is the culmination of years of disputes, that those are the cases that have played out to date. I'm on the front lines of these issues. I see them every day in my work. You see smart energy companies concerned. You see warehousing companies concerned. You see retail companies concerned. You see medical device companies concerned. You see broadcasting companies concerned. These technologies are promulgating throughout the industry and the world. Everything's going to have a sensor, whether it's your blender or whether it's your car or whether it's a shipping container. And anybody who's in business in any industry vertical is going to be grappling with these issues at some point. And if you can't get indemnity from your supplier because your supplier can't get a license, that's going to affect your decision making. Last thing I'll say about sort of the issues relating to IoT and keeping the prices down for IoT. Luckily, the market's already done that for us, right? The standards that we're going to be using in IoT, NB-IoT, LTE Cat-M, are completely different than the standards that are being used in the high-end smartphones that is, the subject of all of this dispute. The patents are different. The IoT standard was intentionally built as I don't want to be demeaning to it because that's not my intention, but a lower end version of the higher end, Cat 15 LTE standard. It's supposed to be machine to machine, not voice. It's supposed to be slower, conserve battery life, all of these things that in the end mean you're using less and less technology as you use these lower end standards. That's why the chips cost a few bucks rather than 20, 25 bucks like the high end LTE chips cost, because the chip makers recognize that there's less technology included in these lower end IoT chips. So those chips are going to be licensed as a standard that is a lower value, lower patented standard at a lower price, not because that's what the handset makers are paying or not paying, but because the patents and the technologies are different.
Great, thanks for that, Dave. Jim, also into digital, it's quite heavily involved in licensing. I keep always wondering, is the cellular space so much more lucrative compared to the wireless space, and why is that? Any idea?
Yeah, I've actually given this quite a bit of thought. I mean, lucrative as in kind of more profitable. I'm honestly not sure in the details of that, but regardless of the model, I think one of the resounding themes, at least among the three of us here, is the value is regarding the value the technology brings to the device. I think from our perspective, that's kind of where the licensing level occurs. Now whether Wi-Fi licensing over cellular licensing, one's more lucrative than the other. They talk about all the billions of devices that will be coming online. I don't know. It sort of just kind of depends on the value of the technology brought to that device. It would be, that example of the drone that goes over forest fires. It's kind of interesting because obviously I don't think a Wi-Fi technology would work in that scenario. I mean, I had a Wi-Fi drone that I lost signal, it blew away. It's gone now because it exceeded the Wi-Fi distance. If it's cellular, you have handoff and you have a lot more integrated system involved. But I think that's kind of an interesting example.
And Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt. Just to be clear, it wasn't that the company decided between Wi-Fi and cellular. I agree with you. That wasn't a competing technology in that environment. The manufacturer decided not to pursue the project at all because it wasn't willing to adopt cellular.
Okay, all right. Well, I like my example better, but I get it. Thank you. So, all right, that's all I have.
I had a question, maybe this is for Dave or Fabian, is, in light of the Department of Justice business letter review, the newer one, and kind of the suggestion that IEEE might want to take a look at their IPR policy again, do you think IEEE will take that suggestion coming from the Department of Justice?
Go ahead, Fabian.
I don't know what they will do. I think the process under which the policy was initially changed was a process of essentially capture by the implementer community, and it was a fairly corrupt process that resulted in that change. I hope that I've not been paying close attention, that the IEEE has reformed since then and has implemented governance processes where all stakeholder interests would be taken into account, and then maybe there would be a change. I mean, we Qualcomm have never put in any commitments under the new policy, and we're never going to. And we contribute a lot to Wi-Fi, so those patents are just out there uncommitted right now.
Yeah, can I jump in real quick? Because Dave, I know you have a response, and I'll pile on to what Fabian was saying, and then because of Dave, I imagine you're going to be the other side. But I think it's important to note that when the changes occurred back in 2015, there was an initial call to action speech, if you will, by the DOJ in 2012. And it wasn't but maybe 2 meetings later that the IEEE sort of, and I think it was like agenda item 6.1, where the chair recommended they take a look at their policy based on the call to action by the department in October of 2012. So now we have a similar scenario. We've got a call to action by the department. Let's see if, a meeting or 2 later, they decide to opt to their agenda to take this on. I don't think they're going to. To kind of every point that Fabian raised, I don't think they're going to. Rules have been constantly changing even since the 2015 change, and most recently they've required if you submit a D1D or a negative declaration, you now need to identify those patents. So it's as a contributor also to the technology, it seems like the rules are constantly changing and have been changing underneath our feet for the last 5 years. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, look, I don't want to belabor this point. I don't know what the IEEE is going to do. Frankly, I don't know what the BRL even means, or the updated BRL even means. That's never happened under the statute for the BRL, which authorizes the issuance of the BRL. It seems it's outside of the scope of the statute to issue a BRL after the file has been closed, or to try to interpret that BRL. The current DOJ has its opinion. The prior DOJ has its opinion. We're going to have a new DOJ in a few months, and we'll see what their opinion might be. In terms of the process for 2015, I mean, look, I understand that there are folks that disagree with the result, but to call it corrupt, to try to demean it in that way, I think is unfair. That argument has been made for many years. It's been debunked for many years. It was rejected by the DOJ. It was rejected by ANSI. Look, there are people that disagree. IEEE has had supermajority voting processes for decades, and IEEE followed its processes. And people might not like that, but that's fine. But it is what it is, and I don't think demeaning the process is the right approach. One question for Fabian, though.
IEEE did not follow its processes. I totally disagree with that, but that's beyond the scope. That's beyond the scope of this seminar. But there's no way IEEE followed its processes, particularly with respect to the duties of the members of those committees.
Without going down that rabbit hole, I have a question for you, Fabian. You said something that surprised me. I know that Qualcomm has chosen not to submit patent declarations under the post 2015 policy, but I thought that for 802.11 there was a legacy blanket declaration under the old policy that Qualcomm was continuing to abide by for all future versions of 802.11. Is that not the case, or can you provide some specificity there?
Well, I think that's a little bit beyond. I don't know that I want to say much more than I've said, but I will point out the fact that, as Jim said, the rules have kept constantly changing since then. So initially, when the 2015 policy was first changed, Qualcomm made arrangements to have its patents covered under a prior general 802.11 declaration under the old policy. And that, by your clients, basically was called into question. And so we've not done that since. Now, if IEEE says, yes, that is acceptable and we want to do that, then that's something we can take a look at. But until there's clarification on the rules, as Jim said, which keep changing all the time, it's just an unsettled situation.
And I just one last point, because this has come up on several other seminars, and Tim, I don't want to take away from this, but this notion that the department did not have the authority to issue this subsequent BRL or whatever squarely falls actually under 28 CFR 50.6 subsection 9, where it says the division remains completely free to bring whatever action or proceeding it subsequently believes is required by the public interest. So I believe that this updated BRL or supplemental BRL or whatever you want to call it falls squarely in that, and that's all I'm going to say on that. Go ahead, Tim.
So yeah, my take on this, it remains to be exciting. So there's no decisions yet. We will see what IEEE will do. We will see how IoT applications will use cellular or wireless. I think that's we don't know that yet. We will have to observe that. But let us also ask our audience what they think. Will access to SEP licenses and the fear of litigation be a factor for the industry to either use Wi-Fi or 5G? Give it a minute, but it's a bit leaning towards yes. But of course, we do not know exactly who our audiences are, but I give it a few more minutes to finish. Yes, thanks everyone. So you see, we have 67% that do say yes. They see that it could, for some cases at least, where you do have the option, have an influence. But I mean, we will see what the market decides for. But I think that was a very interesting discussion, guys. Thanks for that. I would like to now go to our second topic, the world of video coding. And Judd, it would be great if you could kick it off here. I did present a little bit of that situation, but it would be great if you could elaborate on it. We also know that you have been involved somehow in patent pooling in the past, but also are going to be involved in the future. It would be great if you could tell us a little bit about this. The world of video coding is also highly patented. So how is that different to wireless and cellular, and what is going on there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little bit more discrete. These are codecs. They have a singular function. They were actually kind of the pioneer for patent pools. And so I think it's a little more of a simpler use case here for patenting as well as patent pooling. You mentioned like a handful of different codecs that are out there in the landscape, and showed that one chart that has quite a messy landscape for HEVC and AV1, VP9. So the way I look at it is, HEVC and AV1 and VP9 for that matter from Google are kind of all of the same era of codecs. They all have comparable compression ratios, functionality. They can do 4K, things like that. The newest codec, like you said, is VVC, Versatile Video Codec. And it is the latest codec, and it's kind of a step above that other class of codecs, kind of with about a 30 to 50% better compression ratio. It's looking forward to the future of 8K video, even 16K, 360-degree video applications, things like that. So that's the newest codec that just came out, as you said, this summer. But the developers at MPEG and JVET at the ITU of VVC kind of saw the writing on the wall of what happened to HEVC. So if you look at the HEVC landscape, the prior codec from the MPEG group, that split into 3 different patent pools. And when you have 3 different patent pools at 3 different rates and having the prospect of having to pay 3 different prices, it starts to stack. You're not solving the problem of patent stacking. You're trifurcating it or balkanizing it. So to get out in front of that, some of the engineers and other folks at MPEG got together and formed MCIF, the Media Coding Industry Forum. And it's a typical industry forum. It's going to promote VVC, promote MPEG standards, have interoperability events. It has a sub-profiling group. But one of the other objectives of MCIF was to address the patent pool licensing landscape and try to see what we could do to hopefully ameliorate or make that landscape more clear and transparent, so people would adopt VVC. I mean, to your prior question on some of the other technology, do you think the lack of kind of transparent patent licensing hinders adoption? I think a lot of people would agree that HEVC kind of had a slow start and even is somewhat slower than prior codecs because of this balkanization into 3 different patent pools, the non-clarity on how and when, who and how to get a license. So MCIF thought, well, what can we do let's at least see if we can address the issue. If we do nothing, you kind of know where you're going to end up. You'll probably end up looking like HEVC. So we thought, well, let's try to do something and brainstorm a few things. So one action item we've taken is we've started what we call patent pool fostering. This is a kind of a pre-commercial stage, so we're not talking about pricing or terms, anything like that. We're just looking at all the owners or potential owners of VVC patents, and then on the other side, we're looking at who are the patent pool administrators and what are their objectives and how do they run patent pools and what are their philosophies on how to approach the market best. And then we'll put those 2 groups together in kind of a beauty contest or a dog and pony show, I guess, and with the patent owners and the patent administrators to kind of see if we can come to hopefully a consensus as to a great majority of the patent owners representing a great majority of the patents that would choose, at least initially, to go down the path with a single patent pool administrator. There's not a lot of pressure we can put on companies to compel them to go down that path, but if we get the discussion going, the theory is that at least we're having that discussion. We all recognize the problems with HEVC. Let's try to rectify those and see what we can do as far as making the patent pool licensing landscape more transparent and hopefully with a singular patent pool administrator, at least initially. So that's the concept. We're in the middle of that process. We've had a couple meetings with the patent owners. We're talking to at least 4 patent pool administrators, and then we will have meetings coming up here next week with the patent pool administrators, and then we have a patent owners meeting again mid-November to discuss, what were the results of these dog and pony shows from the administrators. That's That's kind of our timeline. We're shooting for maybe some sort of clarity by the end of the year. See if we can get to some consensus.
That is interesting. And that consensus will first be announced, meaning we will have, or you guys will choose one administrator. That will be the first step, or what is to be expected by that first?
Yeah, like I said, we hope to have a consensus with a great majority of the patent owners and representing a great majority of the patents to agree to at least take our initial step with one patent pool administrator. Like I said, I cannot prevent other patent pool administrators from launching their own effort, sure, and can't compel them to go with them. And in some companies, we're not going to get all companies, because some companies just have an independent, like you have in that box, the unaffiliated. They just license separately, and that's okay. That's their business model. We're not going to get everybody, but if we could at least get a consensus of representing a great majority of the owners, at least initially going down the path with one patent pool administrator, that'd be great. And then the next step, of course, is the patent pool administrator would take up the normal effort of setting up a patent pool. That's where they would discuss, pricing and attachment points and who are the licensees they're going after. What's, that's a normal process for setting up a patent pool.
Right. That's interesting. No, that's interesting. Thank you so much. This is I think a good initiative, and I hope it will be successful. Jim, InterDigital, if you look at HEVC, InterDigital did not join any of those pools. But we all know you have a very experienced licensor team. But now you have joined Ciscos. So what is your take on the whole pooling situation? Are you in general in favor of pools, even if you don't join? What is that? Do you think it will facilitate the use of the standard also, or what is your opinion?
Yeah, Tim, thank you. So obviously I'm talking about the video side because we acquired Technicolor a couple years ago, and about half of our company now is dedicated to as much video development as we are about cellular development. So this is a topic near and dear to us. As you point out, also on this slide, we are members of Cisco's AV1 pool. Just so the audience understands, HEVC and VVC is those are like the common terms, if you will, for the ITU standards of H.265 and H.266 respectively, versus something like AV1 and VP9. Those are those are more what we would call in the industry like de facto standards. They're developed by and created by the AOM Media Alliance that includes people like Google and Facebook. And they're more on kind of like the web-based side of the equation. VVC and HEVC, they're more general in nature. They're meant to address many markets. They include a lot of other technologies like 360-degree video coding, screen capture share, and that kind of technology. I think, and as was brought up earlier, pools tend to work more often in the video context than they do in the cellular context, just generally speaking. Cellular is these large system standards that include everything from the end user device to the eNode B and the radio signal and everything that goes on between. And then versus the HEVC and VVC are kind of more on the codec side, and they seem to be a little bit simpler. So I think there are benefits to pools, and I can't really comment why we even joined some of the other ones. That's not a decision it's way above my pay grade, but I do know we are in Cisco.
Good, great. Thanks for those insights. And again, I also want to ask the audience what they think. If those standards somehow compete, have different applications, as Jim was pointing out in Jet, and maybe why we wait for the results, just to have an understanding here. So when VVC is out and they have such an increase of technology merit-wise, is it expected that it will much more quickly be adopted by the industry, or is it a big step from one generation to the other for products to adapt? What is the barrier here? Judd, maybe if you could comment.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a while before you see widespread adoption, I believe. Really, you know, it just came out. You'll get to some software implementations. There we have, looks like about over 2/3 or believe they will compete. You'll have some software implementations, but then, you know, really needs to get into the chip level implementations. That's going to take a couple years. You know, I think you could see people leapfrogging HEVC potentially, because a lot of companies, including cable companies, are kind of at the AVC level. Because of the licensing problems with HEVC, they could skip that and go to VVC. And I think that you know, the migration path from codec to codec is fairly well known and timing, and I don't think it's too difficult from a technology viewpoint, but from a licensing viewpoint, you could certainly help that along by creating a clear licensing regime for VVC, and people would jump to VVC, and that would help adoption.
Okay, that's interesting, and that ties very well to the next question. Will these different pool license models and pricing be a factor for the industry to use either? And I should have included an AVC here when they can jump the HEVC technology. So that is interesting to see. I mean, apparently, of course, your technical merit has to be high enough to change. I remember that from DVD, and then Blu-ray came, and I never thought I need to buy that new device. And then streaming came, and I never did. Right?
Yeah.
Is that similar? Was the jump from AVC to HEVC not as big, and is it different from VVC? Is that something you can comment on, or?
Well, I'm not really an implementer, but I think you know, some of the technologies that might be addressed by VVC, such as, you know, 360-degree video. You might even get into light field and immersive displays. Certainly 8K, it would be great to compress that a little bit more. Certainly when you get to 16K, if they go there, not that the human eye can really detect the difference, but I think that may be a factor. You know, so it does have some applications that even HEVC don't address today. So future applications, that's where VVC will come into play. One interesting development, even since we announced, MCIF announced that we were doing this patent pool fostering effort, HEVC Advance, which was one of the pools there, now called Advance Access, or Access Advance. They have even come out and even credited MCIF with, you know, pushing the industry to get together on these pools, and at least in their press releases have come up with a concept of combining a license for VVC with HEVC. So, and future codecs. So you could have a future codec and you'd be able to get all the codecs. And that's kind of how the audio space works. You pay one fee and you can get a license to all subsequent audio codecs at the exact same price. And you can use all of them. So there's I think, you know, we've spurred a little bit of innovation here on the patent pool front, and we'll see how this comes out.
Great, thanks. We are quite far in time, but Emma, do we have some interesting questions from the audience that came through that the panel may be able to answer?
We do have a few, perhaps looking at the time, we can take a few more straightforward ones. So seeing as we're on the topic of AVC, HEVC, and so on, there's a question here for the panel. How does MPEG-5 or EVC fit into the video coding landscape?
I think it's an alternative to AV1 HEVC. It's backed by another group of companies. That's my understanding.
Yeah, I thought EVC was still within the MPEG regime,
Yeah.
spurred mostly by Samsung, and now some other companies have joined them to basically get at least a core codec that's ostensibly, arguably royalty-free based on only their IP. Now you have extensions that you might have to pay for, but it's a slimmed down codec.
Great.
Maybe we can squeeze just one more in here. Will IoT devices, which need to be inexpensive to achieve mass volume, need new licensing structures? So this goes back to your earlier conversation about the licensing arrangements with whether it's medical devices or consumer products having sensors. So will IoT devices, which need to be inexpensive to achieve mass volume, need new licensing structures, in your opinions?
So this is Dave, and I'll take that briefly. My answer is yes, absolutely yes. IoT devices are going to be promulgated throughout dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of industries. You know, we do not need truck drivers negotiating SEP licenses. We need truck drivers and, you know, agricultural companies and medical companies that can buy licensed devices, put them in their products, and innovate on top of them and make great stuff that we all can buy and use and be happy with. Having a licensing system that denies IoT licenses at the supplier level will be a disaster for development and promulgation of IoT.
So IoT, like any new market, is going to require an approach appropriate for that market. That's the truth of any market. Even in auto, as I said, Qualcomm does licensing at the tier 1 level. Qualcomm doesn't license cars itself, which is different than smartphones. So there's already differential in cellular licensing. IoT is not going to be any different than that. Qualcomm's been licensing machine-to-machine applications for a decade, and those aren't licensed. We don't license the vending machines. We license the modules that go into the vending machines. So the market does take care of these things and is going to take care of these things, and we should resist the calls for massive regulatory changes by the smartphone makers to try to change things in smartphones to accommodate things the market's going to accommodate anyway.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I think we have to close down for now, but my takeaway from this, there's a lot of things going on in the future that we discussed, that there will be tension, there will be litigation, there will be negotiation, which is good. We will figure it out. You know, we do see that some standards and the use of those could be somehow delayed by different licensing, by different complicated pool situations, as we have in video codec. We even had comments that there could be it could be in the decision making of choosing, if possible, one standard to the other. But this is all not decided yet. We will have to see what the market says. So I thank you very much for joining today. It was a very interesting conversation and discussion. And yes, thank you for being here, and let me close down for now. Bye, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.